I was thinking about that last song that we just sang, and I have a feeling that the person who wrote it must have been from the Northwest, because there was a line that says, in there that says, "Your love is enduring through the winter rain." My brother, just thinking about weather, my brother sent me a video message this morning of the back patio at the farm. This has about 10 inches of snow on it, and it's whiteout conditions because they have like 40 or 50 mile an hour winds with blowing snow. And so, like, they had 90s, I think, back in February, and, you know, the blizzard today. I'm thinking, what is up with the weather? So, anyway. So all of a sudden, rain doesn't seem so bad after looking at those pictures today. 40 ladies that are at the retreat. You know, it's exciting, but it definitely looks a little bit empty out here today. But I'm so thankful that they get this time away to draw closer together, but more importantly, to draw closer to the Lord. And so just continue to remember them as they travel back today. You're probably going to need a pencil or pen later on in my message, because there's going to be a few questions I'm going to ask you to write down that I want you to spend some time wrestling with this week to respond to. So just giving you some heads up. In the 14th chapter of Luke, Jesus has another one of those DTR conversations. Hopefully you know what that stands for by now. But define the relationship in case you don't. This time, however, it's not in the shadows of the night like it was with Nicodemus in John 3, nor is it around a dinner table as it was with Simon the Pharisee. This time, Jesus kind of widens the scope a little bit, and he has the DTR conversation with an entire crowd of people. As his popularity began to soar, people were coming from far and wide to catch a glimpse of this miracle worker. By this time, word had spread about this incredible teacher who made the lame walk, the blind see, and turned funeral processions into family reunions. I would imagine that the scene on those hillsides really did resemble the atmosphere of a stadium filled with raving fans, just waiting to see or to hear what Jesus said or did next. It appears that Jesus was okay with large crowds gathering around him. He didn't seem to mind too much the fact that they were coming to be inspired by his teaching, to see some miracles. He always welcomed curious people who were genuinely searching or seeking for truth and for relationship with their Creator. But as with any relationship, there always seems to come this moment where he wants to talk more specifically about the relationship. When he draws a line in the sand, so to speak, and comes to that point where he says, I am not worried about the size of the crowd. I want to know about your level of commitment. Have you only come for a healing and miracle show? Have you just come to hear the latest and greatest motivational speaker? Or are you truly committed to following me? Well, we're about to find out, because Jesus is about to divide this crowd into two groups. No, it's not the sheep and the goats passage. He's about to divide them into fans and followers. Luke chapter 14, verses 25 and 26. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. Turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." What? Did I hear that right? I mean, that certainly doesn't sound very seeker sensitive to me. I don't know about you. Instead of handing out free fish and chips and offering to turn water into wine, Jesus says that if they want to follow him, you got to hate your family and even your own lives. Where in the world did this come from? I would imagine at those words that a lot of fans probably just picked up and headed for home. I mean, I can almost hear them murmuring as they walk away saying, well, it was fun while it lasted, but I sure didn't sign up for this. Some Bible scholars have tried to soften these words of Jesus by saying that, well, Jesus really only meant these words for a select few, like the disciples. So everybody else, you got to just relax. You can breathe a sigh of relief. But verse 25 is very specific. It says that large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned to them and said, when Jesus speaks to the large crowds, he isn't addressing a specific segment of the crowd either. In fact, the word for crowd, as it is used here, means a large group of unidentified people. He wasn't singling out a specific group. Furthermore, in verse 26, he says, if anyone. That's a very inclusive statement. Jesus is not speaking to a seminary class. He's not speaking to a group of pastors or missionaries. What he said that day is true for anyone who wants to follow him. Which begs the obvious question. Does following Jesus really mean that I have to hate my grandma and grandpa, my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, even my own wife and children? Obviously, hating your family would contradict many of the other teachings of Jesus. So why such strong language here? It could be that Jesus was using such dramatic language because in this culture, if you wanted to be a follower of Jesus without your family's blessing, you would have been perceived as hating your family. Because a decision to follow Jesus would have been interpreted as turning your back on your own family and walking away from them. Some of you may have experienced something similar to this when your parents didn't approve of the person you chose to marry. Jesus is honest with the crowd about what it may cost to follow him. He lets them know right up front that following him may mean offending your parents or grandparents. It might also mean even being cut out of the family's will. I've known of people who have actually put off following Jesus because they didn't want to hurt a grandparent's feelings. They wouldn't let the grandparents know that they had chosen to follow Christ. Now, as you sit here this morning, it may be that Jesus is speaking directly to you. You know that your spouse or that your mom or your dad won't approve of you fully committing your life to following Jesus. I hope that isn't the case. But for some of people that you may know, that could certainly be a reality. Or you may have a brother or a sister who won't understand and who might ridicule you and make fun of you if you choose to follow Jesus. But Jesus is saying, yes, that might be part of it, but if you're not willing to choose me over your family, then you're not ready to follow me, so you might as well go on home. The word hate, however, still haven't really addressed that one yet. Because our understanding of hate means to dislike something intensely or to have feelings of intense hostility. And clearly, Jesus doesn't want us to hate our family in that sense. Because it would violate everything else the Bible teaches on the subject of relationships within our family. In fact, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said there are two, really. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, but love your neighbor as yourself. And our families are the closest neighbors we have. So it can't be that literally, can it, to hate? Here's where I think the New Living Translation sheds some light on this verse. It says, if you want to be my disciple, you must hate everyone else by comparison. Your father and mother, your wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. So the New Living Translation still uses the word hate. Now, the Contemporary English Version says this, you must love me more than family. So I think the most accurate understanding what Jesus is requiring of his followers here is a combination of these two translations. Jesus is most likely conveying the idea of love me more than any member of your family. But hate is also accurate because it captures the degree to which we are to love Jesus more. In other words, our love for Jesus should be so far off the scale, so to speak, that anything else by comparison would appear as hate. Let me see if I can explain it in a way that makes a little more sense to make sure that you understand what Jesus is saying here. I want you to imagine that all the different loves of your life are competing in a race to see who wins first place in your heart. There's Jesus. There's your best friend, your spouse. Hopefully that spouse is your best friend. Your children, your grandparents, your parents, your siblings, your job, your hobbies, maybe your cars. I don't know. Whatever it is. And I want you to imagine them all lined up at the starting line, waiting for the sound of the starter's pistol. Now, how many of you think that following Jesus means that when the starting gun is fired, that he finishes first in the race? Okay. Everybody think that? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I got some bad news for you. Because if that's what you think it means to follow Jesus, then you've completely missed the point of what he's saying here. Because what Jesus is actually describing in Luke chapter 14, verse 26, is more accurately understood by picturing a race for first place in your life in which he is the only one on the track. Get the picture? Jesus is not saying here that I want to have first place in your life. What he's really saying here is, I don't even want there to be a second place in your life. When we compare our relationship with him to anything or anyone else, there should be no competition. Fans will always try to make Jesus just one of many. Some fans will take it a step further, and they'll try to make Jesus the first of many. But when Jesus defines the relationship, he makes it clear that he wants to be your one and only. So in diagnosing fandom this week, the third question to help us determine if we are fans or followers is this: is Jesus one of many, or is he my one and only? This next part is for all the people who've ever been married or will ever get married. Probably most everybody in this room. Now, if you're married currently or been married before, let me take you back to a DTR talk that you probably had at some point with your spouse, before you were married, hopefully. Now, for some of you, that might only be a few years ago. For some, it might be decades ago, and it might be a little hard to remember. But I want you to picture a conversation in which you define your relationship with that special someone in order to determine your level of commitment. Now, as you proceed, you start off the proceedings by making it very clear where you stand. Oh, honey, I love you so much, more than life itself. I'm giving you my heart, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And in response, she says back to you, or he, I love you too. And I am willing to commit to you for the rest of my life on one condition. I still want to see other people. Now, how many of you would have even considered marrying your spouse if he or she had said that to you before you were married? Yeah. We got one. One in every crowd. Most of them were like, of course not. But that's essentially what a fan says to Jesus. I mean, think about it. A fan says, I love you, I'm committed to you, but let's not be exclusive here. But Jesus is making it clear in the following verses, these verses we read, that he's not going to share your affection. Following him requires your whole heart. All or nothing. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. So let me ask you some questions this morning to help reveal if Jesus is just one of many or if he's your one and only. These are not rhetorical questions. This is where you need your pen or pencil, because I want you to answer each one And I'm sorry I didn't list them in the bulletin. That's my fault. But if you need more time to think about your answer, take it home, work on it this week. Because how you answer these questions can help show you what is competing with Jesus for attention in your life. Question number 1. Everybody ready? Here it comes. By the way, this first question, if you've been in Joe's Sunday school class basically for the past month, this question pretty much comes right out of his Sunday school class. For what do you sacrifice your money? For what do you sacrifice your money? Luke 12:34 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." You see, what you spend your time and money on often reveals the true desires of your heart and shows who or what you're truly following. The reason Jesus talked more about money than any other subject is because it can easily become his chief competition. It's easy to wind up following money, especially in our culture, in our affluent society. And we sometimes almost begin to worship the things that money can buy instead of just following Jesus. Many of us will sacrifice our time and money for stuff because we think that's how we'll find satisfaction. But Jesus wants to be our satisfaction. He described himself as living water that quenches our thirst forever. Money can easily become a substitute for God because it promises to do for us what God wants to do for us. Matthew 6:24, Jesus said these words, "No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." You can't follow money and Jesus. It just doesn't work. Because those paths go in different directions, and you must choose which one you will follow. Question number 2. Ready? When you're hurt, where do you go for comfort? When you're hurting, or when you're hurt, where do you go for comfort? When you experience pain and suffering in this life, where do you turn? Maybe it's to a parent or a spouse. Maybe it's to the refrigerator. After all, isn't that why they call it comfort food? Sorry. Maybe you just bury yourself in your work. Work overtime, spend extra hours of work just to kind of isolate yourself. All of these things have the potential to compete with Jesus for our devotion and affection. I want to be clear, though, right here. There's nothing wrong with finding comfort from family and friends. In fact, that's part of God's plan. He says in Galatians 6:2, we're to bear or carry each other's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. But the question is, do those things or those people take the place of Jesus? Now, I found that when someone is going through a difficult time or a painful circumstance, that who or what they are truly following is often revealed. When our first response to suffering is to turn to anyone or anything other than Jesus, it might reveal that our devotion, our affection is divided, and that we're following someone or something else other than Jesus. So when is the last time you experienced some pain and suffering in your life? Was it a lost job? Was it a broken relationship? Was it when the test results came back and they weren't what you had hoped for? I mean, when you experienced that pain, where did you turn? Because the answer to that question will reveal your heart's true devotion. Question number 3. Oh boy. What disappoints or frustrates you the most? What disappoints or frustrates you the most? When we feel overwhelmed with disappointment, it often reveals something that has become too important. It might be something as significant as the loss of a job, or something as insignificant as the loss of a ball game. When we find that those things have the power to determine who we are, what kind of day we have, it may very well be evidence that something is more important than it should be. Of course, some level of disappointment and frustration is only natural. And we saw this lived out in the recent election cycle. My goodness. But if you find that you are excessively disappointed or overly frustrated, it can be an indication of what might be competing for affection that should be Christ alone. Imagine this scene. How many of you like to go fishing? And you guys are out here in the Northwest. How many of you like to go fishing? How many of you took a son or daughter or a grandchild fishing before? Okay, great. Now, when you approach that child and tell them that you're going fishing, what kind of response did you normally get? Excitement. Overexcitement. Of course you did. Like, yes. Yeah, can't wait for that day to come. Now, for me, not so much, but, I grew up in landlocked Kansas. I'm sorry, fishing, what's that? And then sometimes you buy it, Long John Silver's or wherever it was that, I don't know. But imagine a boy all excited about his dad who's going to take him fishing, but as the day wears on and the fish just aren't biting, and the dad just gets more and more frustrated, disappointed, starts saying things under his breath a little bit, and on the drive home, he's quiet and surly and clearly upset. I mean, is that not an indication that the most important part of the day for that father was not spending time with his son, but rather catching fish? Or rather, not catching fish? Do you see how excessive disappointment and constant frustration can reveal a heart's true passion? Now, you might need some help answering this question. I mean, be honest. We have a hard time seeing this objectively, especially us men. Ask a close friend or a family member what they have observed that seems to disappoint or frustrate you the most. I've seen people get that way over their favorite sports teams. Oh, my goodness. Mercy. I mean, if you hear answers like a messy house, a losing team, rainy weather, or a dip in the stock market, it might reveal that something is out of order. Okay. Question number 4. It's kind of the opposite of the last one. What is it that gets you really excited? I remember 2012 well in Ashland, because that was the year that our boys' basketball team went 26-0 and won the state title. And I mean, half the town, I think, flocked to Emporia, Kansas, however many hours away that was, to see this last couple rounds of the state, tournament. And I found myself among those cheering in the stands. And I mean, I've even been known to yell at the TV before when my favorite team makes a great play, and I get all excited, like when the Royals won the World Series a few years ago. That's pretty great. There was a little girl who once said to her father when he became excited about a ball game on TV, and she said, "Daddy, I've never seen you so excited before." Just like the things that disappoint us, the things that excite us can also point to something or someone that is in competition with Jesus. It could be sports, it could be decorating, it could be music, it could be our jobs, it could be your appearance. I mean, all of these things are fine and good. There's nothing wrong with any of them, but they have the potential to become a type of mistress that is robbing God of your whole heart. Following Jesus means following Him alone. Fans don't want to put Jesus on the throne of their lives. Instead, they would rather keep a couch on their hearts, where Jesus just gets one cushion to leave room for everything else that they love. But Jesus makes it clear to this crowd that He's not interested in sharing your heart with anyone or anything. Let me say it another way. Jesus will not share you with another lover. Period. Now that analogy might seem just a little bit crude or overstated, but it's biblically consistent in describing how God feels about our divided affections. The prophet Ezekiel described what it's like for God when we share our affections with other things or with other people. He said it's like having an affair. In Ezekiel 16, verse 33, here's what God said to His chosen people who had been worshiping false idols. He said, "You give gifts to all your lovers." Some of you have experienced the pain of unfaithfulness. I mean, when you found out that the person who vowed his or her life to you had been sleeping with someone else, I mean, how did that make you feel? If you've ever experienced those wounds of betrayal, then you know what it's like from God's perspective when we allow anything else to take His rightful place. When God is one of many instead of your one and only, that's how he portrays himself, as a betrayed lover. So in Luke 14, Jesus defines the relationship by making it clear that if we follow him and him alone. He won't share us with anything or anyone, not with money, not with a career, not even with your own family. Perhaps as you read a passage like this, it seems to you that God is being just a little bit overpossessive and a bit jealous. But I want you to understand something very important here. When Jesus is explaining that he will not share your affection or devotion with anyone or anything, he isn't just saying how he wants to be loved by you. He's making it absolutely clear how he loves you. He loves us with a jealous love. I wonder how the disciples responded to a teaching like this. I can't help but think maybe they got a little bit upset with Jesus. Hey, Jesus, man, that's a real downer of a message. I mean, hating your mom, your dad, your family, I mean, that just has a way of turning people off. It's certainly not a crowd-pleasing sentiment. They probably cringed every time Jesus began one of his how not to win friends and influence people sermons, because they knew that, man, there goes our influence with the crowd. But on the other hand, maybe they didn't mind all that much, because as Jesus drove away the crowds, maybe they realized, hey, that's more time that we get alone with Jesus. After all, they'd given up everything to follow Jesus, and by now I'm sure they'd come to realize that's the only way it's going to work. Trying to follow Jesus part-time or half-hearted is impossible. Oh, we try. Lord knows we try. But the relationship he wants with us requires our whole heart. And fans need to know up front that his terms are non-negotiable. So before you say, I want to be a follower of Jesus, be sure you understand what it's going to cost you. In fact, in this chapter, Jesus continues to teach the crowd. He didn't just stop at that kind of bombshell, those two verses. He kind of goes into an explanation of why he's teaching them in such direct and straightforward manner a little later in verses 28 through 30. Just a couple verses later, he says this. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and is not able to finish. I would love to be able to begin to build. That's a whole other story. Jesus makes no apologies for his strong words. He wants people to be clear about what they're signing up for. You see, many fans have responded to a gospel message that was designed to sound as easy and as appealing as possible, only to find themselves a little later on kind of shocked to discover the terms that Jesus actually spells out. But folks, this isn't like reading the fine print of a contract. This was the main point of the contract, the main point of his message. Count the cost. This morning I want to close with a story about a man who not only counted the cost for himself, but advised people to count the cost before following Jesus. His name is John Oros. You see, John was a pastor and church leader in Romania during the communist era when Nicolae Ceausescu was in power. Now, for some of you, that name will ring a bell. Pretty much a dictator, pretty ruthless against the church, because as you know, communism tried to stamp out Christianity for the most part. And so, here's what he said when the communists were in power. He said, during communism, many of us preached. People would come at the end of a service and say, I have decided to become a Christian. And we told them, it's good that you want to be a Christian, but we would like to tell you that there is a price to be paid. Why don't you reconsider what you want to do? Because many things can happen to you. You can lose, and you can lose big. John said that a high percentage of them chose to take part in a 3-month-long class to better understand the decision they were making. And he continued by saying these words. He said, at the end of this period, 3 months. In other words, it wasn't just a quick, raise the hand, walk down the altar. 3 months of training to say, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it means to really follow Jesus. He said, at the end of this period, many participants declared their desire to be baptized. And typically I would respond, it's really nice that you want to become a Christian, but when you give your testimony in baptism, there will be informers here who will jot down your name, and tomorrow the problems will start. Make sure you count the cost. Because Christianity is not easy. It's not cheap. You can be demoted. You can lose your job. You can lose your friends. You can lose your neighbors. You can even lose your own kids. And you might lose your life. Pastor John wanted the people to get to a place where following Jesus became so important to them that if they lost everything, that it would still be worth it. If you lost everything, would it still be worth it to follow Jesus? You see, that's a much different invitation than most of us have responded to, isn't it? I think for a lot of us, it may have been at the end of a sermon when a preacher said something like this: I want every head bowed, every eye closed. If you want to be a follower of Jesus, just slip up your hand quietly and slip it back down. Yes, I see that hand. But Jesus makes it clear that you need to count the cost of what it means to make him your one and only instead of just one of many. So let me ask again, if following Jesus were to cost you everything, would it still be worth it? Let us pray. Father, this is one of those messages that I've wrestled with for years. It is so difficult in our affluent society where we have so much abundance to even try to imagine what it would be like to put everything on the line, to risk everything that we value and that we hold dear in order to follow you. But Father, I realize the point that Jesus is making here is that if we don't somehow understand and realize that our love for you should be so intense, so strong, so single-minded, that everything else by comparison would look like hate. Father, I confess there have been way too many times in my own life where I've allowed other things to share space with you on the throne of my life. Too many times where I've lived as though you were just one of many instead of my one and only. And Father, I realize it's still not something that comes easily or naturally to me. It's still something that I struggle with on a daily basis, as I'm sure it is for many others. Father, I pray that just having heard your word this morning, that we might start to question our commitment level to you. that we might start taking steps to be more devoted to you, that we might strive to wean ourselves from the world and its pull and its influence, and what it says is important. That more and more we become individuals and a church body in which it is clear and evident that our love for you supersedes everything by a long shot. Stir our hearts. Help us take these questions to heart, to see if there are things that have crept in that are vying for your affection that is rightfully only yours. Thank you for what you're going to do in the hearts and lives of your people and in this church as we seek to make Jesus our one and only. For it's in his name we pray. Amen.